The roar of the airfield was deafening, the engines of P-51 Mustangs screaming into the dawn. Captain Richard "Rick" Caldwell tightened his leather gloves and adjusted the straps of his flight jacket. Feeling the familiar weight settle over his shoulders, war had become a constant companion, an invisible presence pressing on the nerves of every pilot stationed at RAF Lakenheath. For Rick, it was more than duty, it was legacy. His father had flown in the First World War, his grandfather. Before him, courage, skill, and sacrifice ran through the veins of the Caldwell family. But the line between bravery and recklessness was thinner than any wing spar. Rick's co-pilot, Lieutenant Thomas "Tommy" Harlow, approached, helmet in hand, a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You ready for this, Rick?" he asked. Rick shrugged, scanning the runway through the morning mist. "Ready as I'll ever be." "You know how it goes, keep your eyes sharp, your mind sharper." Tommy chuckled. Nervously, easier said than done. "Every time we take off, I swear the sky itself hates us." Rick's lips twitched, a brief flicker of amusement. "Hate or not, we keep flying. That's all there is." The two men climbed into the cockpit, the metallic smell of oil and fuel clinging to their clothes. The canopy closed with a hiss, sealing them inside a fragile bubble above a world that had grown chaotic and unpredictable. Rick ran through the pre-flight checks with practiced precision. But a subtle tension lingered, an unspoken awareness that today's mission might not end as usual. The airfield stretched behind them, fog wrapping around abandoned hangars like ghostly arms. Barracks stood silent except for the distant clatter of boots. Another unit. Another mission, another set of men caught in the grinding machine of war. Rick's mind flicked to home, his younger sister, Elaine, tending the garden, while their mother fretted over the letters that never arrived fast enough. The thought was a small, fragile anchor, keeping his nerves from snapping entirely. "Tower, this is Mustang 4-3. We're cleared for takeoff." Rick's voice cracked slightly over the radio. "Mustang 4-3. Roger, clear for departure." "Runway 3, came the calm response, but behind the calm, Rick sensed the underlying urgency. Every mission had its hidden stakes. Every flight might be the one that ended in a silence too heavy to bear. The Mustang's engine roared to life, vibrating through their bones, and Rick felt the familiar surge of adrenaline. They raced down the runway, wheels skimming over the slick tarmac, and then the world dropped away beneath them. Cloud swallowed the landscape, muting the grey fields and distant villages below. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Tommy said, trying to mask the tension in his voice. Rick didn't answer. Immediately, he had always loved flight, the freedom of slicing through the sky, the illusion of control over life and death. "It's beautiful," he said finally. Though his eyes remained fixed on the horizon, they flew in formation with 3 other Mustangs, wings cutting through the mist like sharpened knives. The mission was simple, in theory: reconnaissance over occupied territory, gather intelligence, return. Yet every pilot knew that simple missions were often the most dangerous. Bombers could be lurking, flak hidden beneath the clouds, enemy fighters, patrolling the skies with a predatory patience. Suddenly, a sharp crackle came over the radio. 4-3, report. You're off course. Respond. Rick adjusted his controls, scanning the area. Clouds twisted violently, and the engines shuddered. "I see nothing," he said, gripping the stick. The words carried over a frequency that made the tension almost tangible. Then, from nowhere, an explosion of color and sound erupted. Bursts of orange fire blossomed around them like deadly flowers. Tommy shouted over the roar, "Take evasive. Roll, Rick, roll." The plane lurched, the wings vibrating under the pressure, and for a heartbeat, Rick felt the fragility of it all. One wrong maneuver, one miscalculation, and they would become nothing more than metal and smoke falling through the grey sky. The radio went silent, static, interference, then nothing. Rick's heart pounded as he tried to regain control, the instruments spinning wildly. Tommy's grip on the side of the cockpit tightened, knuckles white. "Rick," he called, voice trembling. A sudden jolt sent the plane into a sharp dive, the forest below rising too quickly to react. Rick fought to stabilize the craft, but something wasn't right. The engine coughed, sputtered, and finally fell silent, leaving them in a terrifying, suspended moment. The world blurred as they plummeted, the horizon tilting at impossible angles. Rick caught a glimpse of the sprawling forest below, dark and silent, hiding centuries of secrets beneath its canopy. He thought of Elaine, of home, of a life that seemed impossibly distant. Then a final shudder, a violent twist, and the cockpit was thrown into darkness. Back at the base, panic spread like wildfire. Pilots returned piecemeal, faces pale, stories incomplete. The word missing hovered over the airfield like a curse. Rick's plane, his identity, vanished into the thick fog of war. Commanders whispered of enemy fire, mechanical failure, even desertion, but no one knew the truth. Elaine, miles away, pressed her face to a window, staring at the sky. She did not yet know that the plane her brother flew would not return. She only knew a void had begun to open, and that the man who had soared above the clouds had disappeared into a silence that would echo for decades. The forest waited, patient, and indifferent, hiding a secret that would not be revealed for 50 years. The airfield fell silent once more, except for the whisper of engines winding down, leaving a hollow ache where hope once lived. Somewhere, beyond clouds and trees, Captain Rick Caldwell's fate was sealed, but history would not tell the full story. The war raged on, and with each passing month, the world shifted around the Caldwell family. Yet for Elaine, time seemed to stand still, suspended in the moment her brother had vanished into the European skies. Letters from the military arrived sporadically, each stamped with phrases like missing in action or presumed lost. The words were clinical, detached, as if they were describing someone else entirely. But Elaine could feel every syllable cut through her, slicing hope from her chest with surgical precision. The family home felt emptier than ever. At the dinner table, Rick's chair remained conspicuously vacant, a silent sentinel of absence. Plates clinked softly as Elaine pushed food around her plate, eyes fixed on the door that had not opened for him in months. Her mother, frail and anxious, often stared at the hallway, imagining footsteps that would never come. "Elaine," her father said one evening, voice low and brittle, "we have to accept. He may never return." Elaine's hand tightened around the fork, knuckles whitening. "How can you say that? You don't know. He could be alive somewhere, fighting, hiding, waiting to come home." Her father sighed, rubbing the back of his neck, the lines in his face deepening. "Sweetheart, we've been told he's been missing for months. The chances..." His words trailed into a silence heavier than any cannon fire. Her mother's voice quivered from across the table. "Elaine, dear, don't let your heart get trapped in something that may never come back. You'll only hurt yourself." Elaine shook her head, eyes brimming with tears she refused to let fall. She imagined Rick, alive but trapped behind enemy lines, thinking of his family, waiting for rescue. It was a fragile lifeline she clung to, a stubborn thread of hope in a world unraveling around her. Outside, the war pressed on, muffled by the distance of radio broadcasts and the occasional drone of fighter planes overhead. Neighbors whispered about casualties, and children of other families wore empty expressions that mirrored her own. Yet, in their grief, her family's silence became more pronounced, almost ritualistic. The house itself seemed to echo each creaking floorboard and shuttered window, a reminder that Rick was gone, or at least that no one could confirm otherwise. In the evenings, Elaine would retreat to Rick's old room, the scent of his childhood faintly lingering among the shelves lined with trophies and photographs. Black and white pictures of Rick in uniform stared back at her, proud, fearless, impossibly young. She traced his face with trembling fingers. memorizing the way his smile could soften even the darkest days. One night, she found herself reading an old letter he had written months before his disappearance. The edges were worn, ink smudged from handling. Elaine, if I make it through this, I'll come home and we'll laugh about all of this. You have to keep believing. I promise you, don't give up. Her chest tightened, a mixture of warmth and despair. She clutched the letter against her heart, whispering softly, I won't give up. Yet, even as she held on to hope, cracks were forming in the family's fragile cohesion. Arguments erupted over seemingly trivial matters, fueled by grief and the unresolved tension of absence. I can't keep pretending everything's fine, her father snapped one morning, pacing the living room. Elaine, you can't live in this fantasy forever. He's gone. How can you say that? Do you think I don't feel him missing every day, every hour? Elaine's voice rose, sharp with emotion. I feel him, in the wind, in the shadows, in every empty room of this house. How can you just give up on him? Her mother tried to intervene, hands trembling as she reached for Elaine. Stop, please, stop. You'll make yourself ill. The silence that followed was suffocating. No one moved, no one spoke. The only sound was the ticking of the old clock on the mantel. Each second dragging the past deeper into the present. Weeks bled into months, and Elaine's determination only hardened. She began to collect scraps of news about missing pilots, stories from old newspapers, and letters sent from faraway bases. Each piece became a clue, a potential path to find her brother. The war had swallowed him whole, but she refused to let him disappear completely. Neighbors began to notice her obsession. Some whispered that she was in denial, that clinging to hope only prolonged her pain. But Elaine didn't care. The world might have moved on, but she had not, and she would not. Rick's absence was a wound that could not be bandaged by time or polite reassurances. Evenings in the house were long, quiet, and haunted. The dinner table remained the same, the empty chair waiting, like a silent challenge to the universe. Return him to us, or admit you have taken him forever. She would sit there, plate untouched, staring across at the void where he should have been, speaking softly to the air. Please, come home, she whispered, though no one heard. The airfield, too, had moved on. Reports listed him as missing in action. The squadron absorbed into other units. The war demanding new faces and new sacrifices. Yet Elaine clung to fragments of memory. The way he had laughed, the scent of his leather jacket, the way he had promised never to leave without returning. These fragments were all she had, but they were enough to keep searching. And so, the years stretched like shadows over her, heavy with unspoken fears and the persistent echo of absence. Rick Caldwell's name became both a prayer and a question. Was he alive? Was he truly lost? Somewhere in the distant forests of Europe, the secret of his fate waited, buried beneath time, trees, and silence. Elaine did not yet know that the answers would arrive decades later, in a rusted plane, hidden from the world. But she would never stop seeking. The silent years were only the beginning of a journey that would uncover truth, betrayal, and the echoes of war too deep to ignore. Decades had softened the world's memory of Captain Richard Caldwell, but not its shadows. While history books moved on to celebrate the victorious and commemorate the fallen, there were corners where whispers lingered, fragments of stories too dangerous or inconvenient to tell. In a small, dimly lit office, tucked away behind a crumbling brick facade in London, Colonel James Henderson shuffled through a stack of dusty files. The edges yellowed and brittle with age. The room smelled of paper, tobacco smoke, and the faint decay of forgotten secrets. Henderson, now in his late 70s, adjusted his spectacles and peered at a faded map pinned to the wall. Tiny notations, some scrawled in pencil and others in faded ink, marked unknown drop zones, patrol routes, and coded coordinates. One name kept surfacing: Rick Caldwell. The colonel exhaled slowly, a shiver running down his spine. Even after all these years, the memory of Rick's mission and the orders that had sent him into the unknown clung like a ghost. He heard the faint knock on the door before it opened. A young historian, Clara Mason, stepped in, notebook in hand, eyes wide with curiosity and the faint tremor of nerves. "Colonel Henderson," she asked, "I've been researching missing pilots from the European campaigns, and your name came up repeatedly in declassified files." Henderson gestured to a worn leather chair opposite his desk. "Have a seat, Miss Mason. But be warned, there's more that hasn't been declassified, more than you might be ready for." Clara sat cautiously, her gaze wandering over the stacks of files, photographs, and the rusted brass instruments lined along the shelf. "I've read about Rick Caldwell. Officially, he's listed as missing in action, but there are rumors, whispers that he was involved in something classified. I was hoping maybe you could clarify." The colonel's hand hovered over a file marked Restricted, Operation Valkyrie Reconnaissance. He let out a low sigh. "Clarify. History isn't always kind enough to offer clarity, Miss Mason. Sometimes it gives fragments, and leaves the rest to the imagination or to those stubborn enough to piece it together." Clara's pen hovered over her notebook. "I'm stubborn," she said softly, though there was a sharp edge to her voice. "And I think Rick Caldwell deserves the truth." Henderson's eyes flickered with something like regret. "Truth is a dangerous companion. You ask about him, and you might not like the answers. He wasn't just flying reconnaissance. There were orders. Orders that some men shouldn't have carried out. And yet, they were given, and they were obeyed." Clara leaned forward. "Orders? What kind of orders?" Henderson tapped the side of his nose, as if weighing the cost of revelation. "There were missions designed to mislead, to misinform. Missions that sacrificed individuals to achieve a larger goal. Rick's last flight was no accident. It wasn't a miscalculation. It wasn't poor weather, and it wasn't luck. He was sent into a situation that no pilot could survive without intervention." A shiver ran down Clara's spine. She scribbled furiously. "But why? Why him?" Henderson's voice dropped to a whisper, almost a confession. "Because he was trusted, too competent, and some of those in command, well, some needed him out of the way. Orders weren't always about the mission, they were about politics, control, fear of exposure." Clara's eyes widened as she absorbed the weight of his words. "Are there records? Anything that proves this?" The colonel leaned back, lighting a cigarette with a trembling hand. Smoke curled into the dim light, casting shadows on the walls lined with maps and photographs of planes suspended in mid-flight. "Proof," he scoffed softly. "You'll find pieces, scattered reports, coded dispatches, even letters that never reached their destination. But the full story, that's buried. And sometimes, buried is exactly where it belongs." He slid a file across the desk toward Clara. The leather creaked as she opened it, revealing yellowed reports, a photograph of a young Rick in full flight gear, and several maps marked with coordinates and cryptic annotations. Each page seemed to whisper a fragment of a story, but nothing stitched together the truth entirely. "Operation Valkyrie Reconnaissance," Henderson muttered, his voice haunted. "It was supposed to be simple intelligence gathering. But intelligence has a cost, and that cost was Rick Caldwell." Clara glanced at the photograph. Rick's youthful face, determined and unbroken, stared back. There was bravery there, but also vulnerability, a humanity often lost in the pages of history. "Was anyone else on the mission?" she asked quietly. Eyes darkened. "Yes, others flew with him. But few returned, and those who did, they spoke in fragments, or they were silenced before their stories reached anyone willing to listen. I've kept quiet for decades, but the walls of secrecy weaken with time, and sometimes they crumble entirely." The colonel gestured to the map. Every mark, every code, was meant to protect some greater secret. But the forest somewhere in Central Europe holds the truth that these documents cannot fully reveal. Rick's disappearance, it was planned, and yet no one could have predicted that half a century later, someone would uncover it. Clara swallowed, trying to steady her trembling hands. "Do you mean that someone could actually find the plane?" Henderson's gaze softened, almost wistful. "Yes, it's out there, waiting." hidden beneath trees, rusted but intact, waiting to tell its story. But the story won't be easy. It's full of betrayal, fear, and the kind of decisions that haunt a man long after the war ends. For a moment, silence filled the study, the ticking of a clock the only sound. Clara felt the weight of history pressing in, the enormity of secrets kept by men like Henderson, and the decades of waiting she would soon inherit. "I need to know everything," she said finally, voice firm. "If Rick's plane is still out there, if the mission was what do you say it was? I have to find out. For him, for history, for truth." Henderson studied her, eyes narrowed, smoke curling upward. "Be careful what you seek, Miss Mason. Secrets from the past have a way of changing the present, and sometimes the present isn't ready for them." He turned back to the wall of maps, lost in the shadows of memory, while Clara sat, flipping through the fragile files, each one a breadcrumb leading her closer to the forest, to the plain, and to the man who had vanished more than 50 years ago. Outside, the city carried on in ordinary rhythms, oblivious to the ghosts of the past that were about to be stirred. Dust motes floated in beams of late afternoon sunlight, dancing over maps and photographs as if they, too, were waiting for the moment when the truth would finally rise from silence. And beneath it all, the memory of Rick Caldwell persisted, unbroken thread weaving together decades of grief, rumors, and secrets yet to be revealed. The forest waited silently, patient, harboring a secret that would not remain buried forever. The envelope arrived on a grey morning, the kind that made the garden look like it had been dipped in ash. Elaine's fingers trembled as she held it. The handwriting on the front, both familiar and strange, looped, deliberate, a signature she did not recognize. No return address. Just her name, neatly inked. She broke the seal with a kind of anticipation she hadn't felt in decades. Inside was a single sheet of paper, yellowed with age, with words that made her heart stumble. "Your brother's plane may lie in the northern forest, near the old rail line. Seek carefully. Some truths are better unearthed slowly." Elaine's breath caught. 50 years of silence, 50 years of missing letters, missing hope, suddenly condensed into 4 lines. She sat down heavily in the kitchen chair, the letter trembling in her hand. Outside, the wind stirred the trees, their skeletal branches scratching against the window as if urging her to act. Memories flooded back. The empty chair at the dinner table. The letters that never arrived on time. The photograph of Rick in his flight jacket, staring proudly at the camera. Each image and echo from her childhood sharpened into a singular obsession. She would find him more, what remained of him. The first step, she realized, was to speak to those who might remember. Locals from villages near the northern forests had grown old, but perhaps fragments of memory remained. Elaine drove along narrow, winding roads, the tires crunching against gravel. Each mile, a journey through decades she had almost forgotten. The forest loomed ahead like a dark promise, dense and indifferent. Shadows pooling beneath towering pines. She approached the first village, a scattering of stone cottages and faded shutters. A few elderly residents lingered near the town square, whispering to each other, eyes flicking toward her as if she carried both curiosity and intrusion. "Excuse me," she began, voice steady, despite the nerves fluttering beneath her ribs. "I'm looking for information about a plane crash during the war. Captain Richard Caldwell. Did anyone?" An older man, his back bent with years of labor, squinted at her. "Caldwell. The name rings a bell." He paused, shuffling closer, saw something odd. "Long ago, trees burned in a small clearing, a metal shape. I thought it was abandoned, maybe a German supply plane. We didn't speak much about it. Best not to, you understand." Elaine leaned in, heart hammering. "Yes, I understand. But any detail, no matter how small, could help." He nodded slowly. "The trees, they were blackened, twisted, and the metal. Oh, it glinted even through the undergrowth. I only caught glimpses. My father warned me never to poke around in old wartime wrecks. Some things people didn't want found." Another villager, a woman with sharp eyes and grey-streaked hair, stepped forward. I remember, a young boy told me once. Planes crashing, strange orders, people told not to talk. My uncle, he worked for the rail lines near there, swore he saw a fighter plane tangled in branches, a man's coat fluttering in the wind. But when he mentioned it to officers, they laughed it off, said it was imagination. Elaine felt her pulse quicken. The fragments were faint, scattered, but they aligned with the letter. With the whispers Henderson had spoken of decades ago. The forest held secrets. And these villagers were the memory keepers. She thanked them and began walking toward the edges of the forest. The trees rising like dark sentinels, shadows thickening with every step. Fallen leaves crunched beneath her. Boots, and the air smelled of wet earth and decay. Each step stirred remnants of a past she had never seen, but could feel echoes of vengeance. The sharp whine of metal against air, and a silence that waited. Elaine's eyes caught on a metallic glint beneath a tangle of roots and moss. She knelt, brushing away decades of detritus, uncovering a fragment of what might have been part of a wing. Rust had eaten away the paint, leaving rough, pitted surfaces that still reflected the pale sunlight. Her breath came in shallow bursts, heart hammering in her chest. Could it be? After 50 years, could this be Rick's plane? She pressed forward, following hints from the villagers' recollections. Clearings opened briefly, revealing patches of sky, only to close again behind. A thicket of trees. Roots twisted like serpents along the forest floor, tangling around fallen branches and hidden remnants of wartime detritus old helmets. A tattered canvas bag, a fragment of a leather flight jacket. Elaine's hands shook as she picked up each piece, tracing the shapes with reverent care. Occasionally, the forest seemed to whisper to her. The wind rustled through the canopy, carrying the distant hum of memories she could not see but somehow felt. Birds flitted between branches, startled by her presence, and every shadow seemed to hold a fragment of history waiting to be recognized. Hours passed, the forest both concealing and revealing, and Elaine felt herself growing closer, yet farther. From certainty, every hint, every rusted shard of metal, seemed to pulse with the story of her brother. Yet the narrative remained incomplete. At the edge of a small clearing, she stopped. There, partially buried beneath fallen pine needles and twisted vines, was the unmistakable outline of a Mustang's fuselage. Rust had claimed it entirely, but its shape-sleek, aerodynamic, defiant was undeniable. Elaine sank to her knees beside it, fingers trembling as she brushed away the overgrowth. She could feel the weight of 50 years pressing down, the silence of decades finally broken. A memory of her father's voice whispered in her mind. Sometimes, the past waits, patient, until someone is ready to find it. She rose slowly, dusting her hands on her jeans, and surveyed the clearing. The forest had held its secret for decades, but now it was hers to witness. Somewhere within that twisted metal, among the remnants of flight and war, lay the story she had been waiting for, and perhaps, within it, answers she had longed for, her entire life. Yet, as she traced the contours of the plane, a cold realization settled over her. The discovery would not be simple. The fragments told a story, yes, but the full truth was likely tangled with betrayal, secrecy, and choices made. Long before she was born, she felt the weight of history, heavy and unyielding, pressing down with the silent insistence of the forest around her. Elaine straightened, squinting against the low afternoon sun filtering through the pines. Somewhere deep inside, a spark of hope flared, one that refused to die, one that demanded she continue. The forest might have held Rick's secret for 50 years, but it would not hold it forever. She took a deep breath, steeling herself. There were answers to be found, questions that needed asking, and pieces of a story that demanded attention. And somewhere in the rusted metal, the shadows of the past waited, ready to speak their truth to anyone willing to listen. The forest had grown silent as the morning mist dissipated, leaving only the faint hum of insects and the occasional rustle of leaves. Elaine led the small team of investigators along the narrow, winding path she had painstakingly mapped from villagers' recollections and her own exploration. Each step felt like a journey through decades of memory, a walk alongside the ghosts of a war that had long since ended but whose echoes remained embedded in the land. When they reached the clearing, the forest seemed to pause, as though acknowledging the presence of those who had come seeking truth. There, partially hidden beneath a thick blanket of vines and moss, was the unmistakable outline of the Mustang's fuselage. Rust had claimed it over 50 years, transforming sleek metal into jagged, oxidized ridges. Sunlight pierced through the canopy in golden shafts, illuminating the plane's twisted contours and giving the scene a surreal, almost sacred glow. Elaine's breath caught in her throat. She stepped closer, her fingers trembling as she reached out to touch the cold pitted surface. "It's really him," she whispered, voice trembling with awe and disbelief. One of the investigators, Dr. Marcus Feldman, a historian specializing in wartime aviation, knelt beside her. His eyes scanned the fuselage, tracing the curvature of the wings and the remnants of painted insignias. "I can't believe it," he murmured. After all these years, the documentation was incomplete, reports contradictory, and yet here he is, remarkably intact, given the decades of exposure. Another member of the team, Lieutenant Sarah Kent, frowned as she examined the overgrowth surrounding the wreckage. The forest hasn't been kind. Roots have twisted through the fuselage, trees leaning against it, metal corroded. It's a miracle it survived at all. Elaine's gaze lingered on the cockpit. She imagined Rick strapped inside, determined, young, unknowing that this flight would become his final and most enduring mission. The canopy was partially caved, the glass shattered decades ago, leaving a jagged frame that resembled the open eyes of a long-forgotten dream. She reached forward, resting her hand against the cold metal, and felt the weight of absence. 50 years of waiting, 50 years of unanswered questions, all compressed into this single, silent monument. Dr. Feldman turned to the team. "We need to document this immediately. Photographs, sketches, notes, everything. Once this is exposed, the world will want access. We need to preserve the historical integrity before curiosity or worse, vandalism reaches it." Elaine glanced at him, tension tightening her shoulders. Preserve it, or make it public? The villagers said people were warned not to talk. "I don't want this place to be disturbed or exploited. Not yet. It's sacred." Sarah sighed. "We can't keep it secret forever. Once historians, government agencies, or media get wind of it, this site will be swarmed. It's not just history, it's a discovery of international significance." Alan's eyes filled with tears. "Then we need to do it right. Carefully, respectfully. My brother, he deserves that much." The team nodded, understanding the gravity of her words. Each of them approached the wreckage with a mix of professional detachment and personal reverence. Cameras clicked, brushes swept dust from jagged edges, and notebooks filled with meticulous observations. Every crevice of the fuselage seemed to tell a story. The twisted metal of the wing, the cracked cockpit glass, the corroded engine cowling. It was as if the forest itself had carefully preserved these pieces. Waiting for someone patient enough to find them, Elaine walked slowly around the plane, noticing the subtle curvature of the tail, the faint traces of paint along the rudder, and the warped insignia on the fuselage. She could almost see Rick climbing into the cockpit decades ago, feeling the roar of the engine beneath him, trusting in skill and luck to carry him through the skies. The forest had hidden him, yet it had not erased him. Dr. Feldman approached her, a mixture of awe and sadness in his eyes. "Elaine, this is more than just a plane. This is a testament to courage, to sacrifice, to the decisions made in the fog of war. But we have to be honest, the investigation that follows may reveal truths that are painful, perhaps even shattering. Are you ready for that?" Elaine swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've waited 50 years. I can't not know now." She reached into her bag and pulled out a photograph of Rick in his flight jacket, holding it against the sunlight. Comparing it to the cockpit, the outline of the controls, the seat, she felt an uncanny alignment. It was as though time had folded itself around this place, preserving his story until someone finally returned to witness it. Suddenly, Sarah knelt near the rear fuselage, calling the others over. "You need to see this," she said. Fingers trembling, she pointed to a small, rusted compartment, partially obscured by roots. Inside, they found fragments of Rick's personal effects, a tattered flight log, a damaged wristwatch, and a notebook whose pages had faded but still bore traces of ink. Each artifact was a tangible connection to the man they sought, each one carrying decades of unanswered questions and silent testimony. Elaine bent over, carefully lifting the items. She could almost hear his voice, soft and determined, echoing. Across time, her chest ached, a mixture of grief, relief, and recognition. He had flown, he had vanished, and now, at last, the pieces were converging. Dr. Feldman carefully documented each item, his expression somber. "The condition of these artifacts, it's extraordinary. They tell us more than any report ever could. But, Elaine, this also means your brother's disappearance wasn't a simple accident. There are layers, hair orders, missions, choices that remain buried, and they may not be easy to uncover." Elaine nodded, clutching the photograph close to her heart. "I need to know. All of it." The afternoon sun filtered through the dense canopy, casting long golden shadows across the rusted metal. Dust motes floated lazily in the air, illuminated by slivers of light that seemed to spotlight the wreckage like a shrine. Elaine could feel the weight of history pressing down, heavy and unyielding, yet filled with the promise of revelation. Sarah glanced at the plane, then back at Elaine. "Do you want this site preserved as it is, or do we start excavation and restoration? Once the world knows, there will be pressure to remove and display. But here, in situ, it tells its story best." Elaine's gaze lingered on the cockpit, on the twisted wings, and on the fragments of a life frozen in metal and rust. "We keep it here," she said firmly. "As it is, let it speak on its own terms." The team exchanged glances but nodded, understanding that some discoveries are too personal, too sacred, to be hurried or exploited. As they packed up for the day, Elaine lingered, fingers brushing along the fuselage, tracing the outlines that had remained hidden for decades. She could almost feel Rick's presence, a warmth beneath the layers of rust and time, a tether between past and present. The forest had guarded him, had waited patiently, and now it had finally released its secret. The moment was heavy with significance. The plane was more than a relic. It was a bridge between generations, a testimony to courage and loss, to the decisions made in secret and the consequences that followed. Elaine felt both the weight and the clarity of history pressing on her. The certainty that the next step's investigation, revelation, and truth would not be easy, but were necessary. She stepped back, letting the sun illuminate the full length of the plane. The shadows of trees stretched across the clearing, twisted roots entwined with twisted metal, and the quiet hum of the forest seemed to whisper, "The past has been unearthed, and it will speak." Elaine took a deep breath, the forest around her, alive with echoes of the long-lost flight. The rusted Mustang, once a vessel of disappearance, was now a witness to history, and somewhere within its remains, the story of her brother awaited, ready to unfold to anyone willing to listen. The interior of Rick Caldwell's Mustang had remained eerily preserved despite the decades. Elaine crouched within the cockpit, careful not to disturb the fragile remnants of the past. Among the debris, partially wedged beneath the warped seat, she noticed a bundle of pages edges torn, water-stained, ink smudged from time, but still legible in places. A diary. Her hands trembled as she lifted it, the leather cover brittle, the spine nearly disintegrating. Each page felt like a heartbeat suspended in time, fragile yet insistent, whispering secrets decades old. She opened it carefully, the faint scent of old paper and rusted metal filling her senses, and the first lines brought a lump to her throat. March 12, 1943, the orders came today. Reconnaissance over the occupied territory, but there's more than what they've told me. I feel the weight of this mission pressing on my chest. I don't know if I can trust the men in command, And yet, I must obey. Elaine's eyes moved slowly across the faded ink. The diary's narrative carried both fear and determination, the inner voice of a man caught between duty and conscience. Rick wrote with a meticulous hand, documenting not just coordinates and times, but his thoughts, doubts, and the private corners of his heart. March 14, 1943, Maggie visited me tonight. Margaret Foster. I can barely call her Lieutenant Foster. In my mind, she is too alive to present. We laughed under the stars. Sharing stories we shouldn't. I know the rules relationships in the squadron are frowned upon, but I cannot deny the bond. There is something forbidden in our closeness, but also something vital. The entries revealed the depth of Rick's secret attachment to Lieutenant Margaret Maggie Foster. Elaine's heart ached, imagining her brother young, alive, and daring to feel love amidst the chaos of war. She read further, March 20, 1943, the squad feels different today. I notice glances exchanged, whispers in corners. I cannot shake the feeling that some may envy me or worse, mistrust me. Orders have been given in secrecy, ones that risk lives beyond reason. I am caught between loyalty and morality, knowing that one decision could condemn more than just me. Elaine felt a chill as she traced the words with her fingers. Betrayal, secrets. The diary hinted at undercurrents in the squad, a fracture she hadn't expected. A flashback stirred in her mind, almost cinematic in its intensity. She could hear Rick's voice, steady but low. Maggie, if they question me, if they try to twist my words, you must protect yourself. This mission, it isn't what they tell the others. I fear for them, and for us. And Maggie's voice, soft but firm, answering, Rick, you're too brave for your own good. Whatever happens, I'll be here. You don't have to face it alone. Elaine's eyes misted. The diary was more than a record of coordinates, and reports it was a living document of Rick's emotional life. The quiet courage, the fear, the forbidden love, and the moral weight of his choices. April 1, 1943, I flew over the forest today. The same one I imagine I will never return from. Every tree, every clearing felt like a mirror of my doubts. The metal beneath me vibrates with a truth that no one else will acknowledge. I think of Elaine, of home, and wonder if she will ever understand why I follow these orders without question, even as I question them in my heart. Elaine traced the words, envisioning the young pilot, alone in the cockpit, storm clouds rolling beneath him, the forest waiting silently below. The diary conveyed his fear in tangible form, the physical and emotional strain of duty clashing with conscience. Further pages revealed the complexity of his mission. Coded entries hinted at clandestine operations, directives that skirted the edges of legality, and intelligence so sensitive it could not be shared even with his closest comrades. Yet within those same lines, there were moments of tenderness. Letters written in code to Maggie, expressions of longing and hope. April 7, 1943, Maggie. If you are reading this, know that I think of you constantly. This war has forced me to see the worst and the best of men. There are those I trust, and those I fear. And sometimes, the line between them is thinner than a thread of smoke. If I vanish, remember me not for the mission, but for the love I carry for you. Elaine's hands shook as she turned the pages. These words, intimate and raw, had survived decades of rain, decay, and rust. Each line was a testament not only to Rick's skill as a pilot, but to his humanity. A particularly water-damaged page revealed hints of betrayal. April 10, 1943, I fear someone in the squad has been feeding information to the enemy. I cannot name them, but I can feel it, the subtle shifts in conversation, the silent judgments. If this flight is my last, it may be because of this betrayal, not mere circumstance. Maggie, I wish I could trust more, but I cannot. The forest may hold the final answer, or it may conceal the truth forever. Elaine's chest tightened. Betrayal, a secret mission. Love, forbidden by the rigid hierarchies of wartime discipline. She realized that the diary was more than personal reflection. It was evidence, Evidence of what had been hidden from official records, what had been suppressed, and what had caused Rick's disappearance. The entries grew increasingly fragmented as the ink faded, the pages water-damaged from decades of forest humidity, but, even in the deterioration, the voice remained clear, defiant, and human. April 12, 1943, if this is my end, I hope it is not forgotten. Let the forest guard my story until someone listens with care. Remember me as I was, as I am, not as history may wish to label me. And Maggie, you will always be my truth. Elaine felt a lump in her throat. The diary, weathered and torn, had survived as if waiting for her, a bridge across time. Within its fragile pages were the proof of love, courage, secrecy, and betrayal. She folded it carefully, pressing it against her chest. Rick had trusted her, even in absence, to seek the truth. Dr. Feldman, observing her, cleared his throat softly. Elaine, this is remarkable. Diaries like this don't often survive decades in such conditions. And they give us more than coordinates, they give us insight. Insight into decisions, motivations, personal truths that official reports never captured. Elaine nodded, tears streaking her cheeks. I feel like I'm holding him. Finally. In some way. Not just the pilot, not just the mission, but my brother. Sarah, still documenting the site, glanced up. The diary, it confirms what Colonel Henderson hinted at, doesn't it? Secret orders, betrayals. Perhaps even the reason the mission went wrong. Elaine exhaled slowly, determination hardening in her gaze. We have the evidence now. We have to uncover the rest, the mission, the squad, Maggie, everything. He trusted us to finish this story. Outside, sunlight slanted through the canopy, highlighting rusted metal and scattered leaves. The forest, once a silent guardian of secrets, now seemed to lean in, awaiting the unraveling of the truths Rick had preserved in ink and heart. The diary was no longer a fragment. It was a clear guide to understanding a disappearance that had haunted generations. Elaine carefully placed the diary in a protective sleeve. Each page was a voice from the past, insisting on being heard. And she was ready to listen, to confront the shadows of the forest, the hidden betrayals, and the truths long buried beneath trees and time. The journey was just beginning. The city's archival buildings smelled of dust, old paper, and the faint tanks of mildew. Elaine and Dr. Marcus Feldman moved cautiously between rows of shelves stacked with yellowed reports, brittle folders, and faded maps. The air seemed to hum with the weight of decades, the accumulated secrets of a military bureaucracy that preferred silence to truth. Every creak of the floorboards echoed like a reminder. Rick's story was buried not only in the forest but in files. Locked away from prying eyes, Elaine clutched the diary to her chest as they entered a small, dimly lit room, reserved for restricted military records. Feldman gestured toward a stack of declassified reports, still heavy with redacted lines and cryptic annotations. These are the official records of missions conducted in 1943, including Valkyrie reconnaissance. Most of it has been sanitized over the years, but if you look closely, you can start to see the patterns, the gaps, the inconsistencies. Elaine's eyes narrowed. The diary mentioned orders given in secrecy. People in the squad apparently didn't know the full mission. Could that be hidden here? Feldman nodded slowly. Yes, and if Rick's suspicions were correct, some of those orders weren't just secret, they were designed to remove him from the equation. Internal politics, envy, fear of exposure. These documents hint at manipulation at the highest levels. Elaine pulled the diary from her bag, turning to the page, describing the ominous briefing before the mission. I cannot trust some of the officers. Their eyes lingered too long on my record, on my skill. If I vanish, it may be by their design. The words burned in Elaine's mind. Betrayal was no longer abstract. It had a name, a motive, and a chilling precision. As they pored over the files, an elderly man entered quietly. His posture was rigid, uniform still pressed from a time long past, though faded and moth-eaten. Feldman introduced him. Lieutenant Colonel Robert Hastings, one of the surviving officers from the 1943 command staff. Hastings' eyes flicked toward the diary. You've found it, have you? The boy's words, always so precise, so painfully aware. Elaine took a cautious step forward. Colonel Hastings. We need to know the truth. Was Rick deliberately sent on a mission that was meant to fail? Was there betrayal in his squad or from his commanders? Hastings exhaled slowly, his eyes distant. You don't ask questions like that lightly. You're touching old wounds, decades deep. But yes, some decisions were made, political maneuvers disguised as operational orders. Rick was talented, yes, but he had enemies. Men who feared exposure, men jealous of his skill, men who wanted him gone without the stain of direct responsibility. Elaine's hands tightened on the diary. Why? He was loyal, brave. Why would anyone want him gone? Hastings' gaze softened. Power, Miss Caldwell. Military politics doesn't forgive ambition, even in a young pilot. Rick threatened more than enemy lines, he threatened reputations, hidden agendas. And when the command saw an opportunity to eliminate risk, they did. Orders were twisted. Missions were manipulated. Feldman interjected, voice tense. So, the diary wasn't exaggerating. The mission wasn't an accident. It was engineered. Rick's disappearance was no coincidence. Hastings nodded grimly. It was not. And those who knew few spoke, fewer acted. There were whispers in offices, quiet reprimands, warnings to anyone who asked questions. The forest holds the final scene, but here, in these records, the shadows of betrayal remain preserved. Elaine's throat tightened, a mixture of rage and sorrow. How could they? How could they treat someone like him as disposable? Hastings' eyes reflected decades of regret. In times of war, morality becomes a currency few can afford. And some, unfortunately, spend it recklessly. Feldman leafed through a folder marked confidential. Valkyrie Ops. Here, see these annotations, the flight logs, communications, redacted messages to Rick and back. There's a pattern of delayed orders, conflicting intelligence, and instructions that would have put him in danger without backup. Elaine's voice was barely audible. So, every warning, every hesitation in the diary, it was real, he knew, and he faced it anyway. Hastings sighed. Courage. That boy had more than most. But also he carried the burden of knowledge no one else could see. And perhaps that was what made him a target, knowing too much, caring too much, risking too much. A silence fell over the room, heavy and reverent. Elaine traced the edge of a report with her finger, feeling the weight of history pressing down. The betrayal was no longer abstract. It was personal, intimate, and painful in ways she had only begun to comprehend. Suddenly, Feldman looked up, concern etched across his face. Elaine, we need to be cautious. Some of these files, some of these men, even now. There are consequences to digging too deeply. People don't like secrets exposed, even after 50 years. Elaine's eyes hardened. Rick trusted me. I'm not stopping now. Whatever it takes, I need the truth. I need to understand what happened to him and why. Hastings leaned back, hands clasped, voice low. Then you'll uncover things that weren't meant to be uncovered. Betrayals, cover-ups, not just in the squadron, but in the upper echelons, and sometimes, the truth isn't clean. It's messy, painful, and leaves scars on everyone involved. Feldman's fingers tapped rapidly on a typewritten report. Look at these names omitted, actions deleted, entire sections blacked out. But the pattern is there. Orders diverted, reconnaissance routes altered, communication delayed. If Rick had followed the original plan, he might have returned, but the plan was rewritten against him without his knowledge. Elaine's jaw tightened, so he knew he might not make it. And yet he went anyway. Hastings nodded. He went anyway. Because he was not only brave, he was principled. He followed the orders, even knowing they were flawed. That is why we remember him as a hero, and why this betrayal cut so deeply. Elaine's gaze fell on a list of squad members. One name, partially obscured by decades of redaction, kept catching her eye. Something about the ink smudged as if it had been intentionally tampered with. A silent accusation in the midst of bureaucratic camouflage. Feldman leaned closer. This might be who tipped the command to redirect the mission. The redactions aren't just caution, they're protecting someone who acted in secret. Someone within the squad. Elaine closed her eyes, imagining Rick flying into the stormy skies. Knowing the betrayal above, the forest below, and the uncertainty of who would live and who would die. Her hands clutched the diary, anchoring herself to his voice, to his truth. She opened her eyes, determination clear. We'll follow the trail. Every redaction, every altered order. We'll uncover who betrayed him and why. Rick deserves that. Hastings stood, his frame stiff with age, but his presence commanding. Be careful, Miss Caldwell. Betrayal leaves more than wounds, it leaves echoes. And some of those echoes may still be dangerous. Elaine nodded, resolute. Waited 50 years for this, I can face whatever echoes remain. The archival room seemed to contract, shadows stretching across the walls lined with secrets. Stacks of yellowed reports, faded correspondence, and forgotten maps bore witness. 2 decades of deception, yet Elaine felt a surge of clarity. The truth was within reach. As they prepared to leave, Feldman glanced at her. Next step, identify the individuals involved. Cross-reference the diary with these files, and determine how far the betrayal went. We'll need precision, patience, and courage. Elaine's fingers brushed the diary once more. Rick had both now, so do I. The city outside was oblivious to the web of intrigue unfolding in the archives, but Elaine felt the weight of history pressing forward. Betrayal had cast long shadows, but shadows could only survive where light had yet to reach, and she intended to shine that light, no matter how painful the revelations would be. The forest that had once swallowed Rick's Mustang now seemed to hold other secrets. Elaine followed the narrow dirt path alongside Dr. Feldman, each step stirring fallen leaves that whispered like ghosts of the past. The trees leaned close, casting long shadows that flickered in the late afternoon light. Somewhere ahead, a small cabin emerged from the undergrowth. Its wood weathered grey, windows cracked, roof sagging with age. It seemed abandoned, yet something about the place hummed with restrained tension, as if the air itself remembered decades of silence. Elaine took a deep breath and knocked on the door. The sound echoed through the cabin, sharp and unfamiliar in the quiet forest. After a moment, it creaked open, revealing an older man, bent from years of labor and worry, eyes wary but curious. You're looking for Rick Caldwell? The man asked, voice hoarse yet steady. I might have seen him. Elaine stepped forward, urgency in her posture. You did see him? When? Where? The man hesitated, glancing nervously over his shoulder. It was after the crash. A few days, I was cutting wood near the clearing. The forest still quiet, and I saw a figure moving. Thought it was a soldier. Lost, but he was alive. He looked exhausted, covered in mud, but breathing. Dr. Feldman adjusted his glasses, skepticism evident in his tone. And you didn't report this at the time? The man's eyes darkened, haunted by memory. I couldn't. There were people watching. Those who control what's remembered. I didn't want trouble. I've kept it buried all these years. I swore no one would know. Elaine's voice sharpened, a mix of frustration and hope. For 50 years, you've carried this alone while my brother's fate was left uncertain. The man flinched, but didn't back down. I was scared. Power doesn't forgive loose lips. You don't know what it was like. I saw things, heard, things that weren't meant for me. People died for less. I was just a witness, a shadow. Elaine exhaled slowly, trying to steady her emotions. Then, you are no longer alone. We're here to find the truth. Rick deserves that, and so do you. Tell me everything, he motioned. Them inside the cabin, where the air was thick with dust and the scent of decayed wood. A single oil lamp flickered weakly, casting the room in wavering shadows. Elaine noted the worn furniture, maps tacked on the walls, and the faint outline of a fireplace long unused. The cabin itself seemed frozen in time. A witness as silent as the forest outside. I saw him near the clearing where the crash happened. The man began, voice low. He wasn't moving toward the village or any known path. He was alone, trying to hide, and yet, someone was looking for him. Men from the command, I think. They were in uniform, but not the ones I recognized from the squadron. They whispered, checked the area. Left nothing but fear behind. Dr. Feldman frowned. So he wasn't immediately found by locals or rescued by the army. The man shook his head. No. And if I hadn't been careful, I'd have disappeared, too. I've seen what secrecy costs. That's why I never spoke. Not to the authorities. Not to anyone. I didn't want them thinking I had proof. I just watched from the shadows. Elaine's hand trembled on the diary she still carried, and you're telling us now, because you looked at her, eyes steady despite years of fear. Because the forest, it's old enough, the secrets have grown roots. And I think it's time someone speaks for the lost. For him, you. You're his family, aren't you? You have the right to know. Elaine's throat tightened. She remembered the diary entries, Rick's subtle hints of betrayal, the suppressed orders, and the mysterious mission. Can you tell us what he said? What happened in those days before he vanished? The man shifted uneasily, then took a deep breath. He didn't speak much. He was careful. But he wrote things down, sometimes muttered to himself. I saw him hide something near the fallen trees. A notebook, maybe. His hands shook. He trusted no one, and he mentioned Maggie, said she would know if anyone did. He was scared. But he still wanted to survive. Elaine's pulse quickened. Maggie Foster, the lieutenant mentioned in the diary, had been a critical figure in Rick's secret mission. Did you see anyone else? Any squad members? He shook his head. Not near him, but there were shadows watching from a distance. I think some were assigned to make sure he didn't return. Someone wanted him gone. I don't know names, only movements, patterns. Enough to know it wasn't an accident. Dr. Feldman jotted notes rapidly, face pale with realization. Corroborates parts of the diary, secret orders, deliberate danger. And now an eyewitness. Elaine. This changes everything. Elaine felt a mix of relief and anger. The diary had already revealed betrayal, but here, decades later, a living witness confirmed it. Why come forward now? Why after 50 years? The man's eyes met hers, steady despite age and years of fear. Because the forest remembers. And so does the truth. If you don't follow it, who will? Elaine exhaled, gathering her courage. We will. We'll uncover the full story. Rick deserves that, and Maggie deserves answers too. The man nodded, satisfied but wary. Be careful. Secrets have a way of surviving longer than the people who hold them. And some still hold power. They may try to stop you, even now. Elaine's resolve hardened. Let them try. We have the diary, the witness, the wreckage. We're not stopping. Outside, the forest stretched, dense and shadowed, the sun dropping behind thick canopies, every rustle of leaves, every snapping branch seemed amplified in the quiet. Elaine felt the weight of history pressing down, heavy and unyielding, but also the momentum of truth pushing forward. She turned to Feldman. Next, we map everything he told us. Cross-reference with the diary, the logs, the squadron records. The pieces are coming together, slowly. We'll find Maggie. And maybe the final answers about what really happened. Feldman nodded. Yes. But, keep in mind, memory can be tricky. Fear and time blur details. Still, this witness is credible. His caution proves he knows what he saw. That knowledge comes at a cost. Elaine glanced once more at the cabin, the flickering lamp casting shadows on the walls, and felt the full weight of the forest's silence. For decades, it had hidden him, protected him, and preserved the secrets of betrayal and survival. Now, those secrets were awakening. The man escorted them to the edge of the clearing. I won't lead you inside the forest again. Too many things can go wrong. But follow the trails, the diary, and the memories. You'll find what you're looking for. Elaine pressed the diary to her chest, feeling its weight both literal and symbolic. Thank you, you've given me more than I can say. Rick, you're not forgotten, not now, not ever. As they walked back through the shadowed paths, the cabin shrinking behind them, Elaine felt a mixture of exhilaration and dread. The witness had opened a door, decades closed. But with the truth approaching, questions multiplied. Who had orchestrated the betrayal? How had Maggie survived the chaos? And could Rick's final days be reconstructed from these fragments? The forest seemed alive, watching, waiting. Elaine's heart beat with determination. She knew that what came next, finding Maggie, confirming the final details, and confronting the hidden powers behind the betrayal would test every ounce of courage she possessed. And somewhere, beyond the dense canopy, the echoes of Rick Caldwell's flight whispered through the trees, waiting for the truth to follow. Rain fell in steady sheets, tapping against the roof of Elaine's temporary study in the forest's edge cabin. The storm mirrored the turmoil in her mind, each gust of wind a reminder of the tangled truths she was uncovering. She spread the diary, witness notes, and archival documents across the worn wooden table, tracing patterns in ink and yellowed paper. Every piece of evidence seemed to contradict the next, and yet, collectively, they sketched a narrative of courage, betrayal, and human frailty. Elaine's hands shook as she read aloud one of Rick's entries. April 10th, 1943. I feel the tension. In the squad, some look at me not as a comrade, but as a threat. Orders are unclear, and I wonder if my survival is desired by those I trust. Her voice faltered. He knew, Marcus Fial. He knew they were setting him up, and he still flew that mission. Dr. Feldman rubbed his temples, leaning back in the chair. The documents corroborate parts of his fear. Delayed orders, contradictory instructions, strategic miscommunications. It's clear that someone manipulated the chain of command. But Elaine, it wasn't just politics. There's human emotion involved. Envy, fear, personal grudges. Elaine's eyes burned with frustration. And Maggie, he trusted her. She knew what was at stake. Why didn't anyone protect him? Feldman sighed. Maggie was constrained by the same rules, the same hierarchy. She couldn't openly defy orders without risking court-martial, or worse. She tried to shield him, but secrecy and fear ruled the squadron. And when loyalty clashes with protocol, hearts often break in silence. Elaine traced a page of the diary, fingers lingering on the faint, water-stained ink. April 12, 1943. Maggie, if this is my end, I hope you understand. I cannot act against the mission openly, even as I suspect betrayal. You are my only truth in this storm. If I vanish, let the forest hold my story. The words pressed heavily on Elaine's chest. Forbidden love, loyalty, strained by circumstance. And the moral cost of courage. Rick's life had been a crucible of extremes, and only now was the full heat of it visible. She leaned closer to the witness notes. The local man had described Rick moving cautiously through the forest after the crash, hiding, muttering to himself, and protecting a hidden notebook. Elaine realized this corroborated the diary's final entries. Rick had survived the initial impact, but isolation, exposure, and the weight of betrayal left him vulnerable. Marcus, he wasn't just a victim of circumstance. He actively tried to survive. To preserve truth, Elaine murmured, eyes narrowing. And maybe that's why someone wanted him gone so badly. They feared the story he could tell. Feldman nodded exactly. And now we have multiple sources, the diary, witness accounts, and archival records, all pointing to a deliberate orchestration of his near-fatal mission. But the story is fractured. We have hints of betrayal from within the squad, veiled references to higher command interference, and the moral grey of Maggie's constrained actions. Elaine's mind raced. She thought of Maggie, of the love that had bloomed in secrecy and courage that could not be expressed openly. Rick had trusted her. He had written to her in code, confided in her, counted on her even as he faced death. Her fingers trembled as she read aloud another line from the diary. April 14, 1943. If the forest is my tomb, may it also be my witness. Those who betrayed me will not escape the reckoning of time. Maggie, protect the truth if you can. I have no illusions about the men around me. I only hope someday my actions, however flawed, are understood. Elaine's voice cracked, the emotional weight of 50 years crashing over her. He knew Marcus, he knew the cost, and he accepted it anyway. That's bravery beyond measure. Feldman leaned forward, tone low and intense. But bravery alone doesn't absolve the betrayal. There were those who wanted him gone, and those who stayed silent while it happened. We're uncovering the moral fractures in every level, the personal, the professional, the systemic. Elaine closed her eyes, the storm outside intensifying, rain lashing against the cabin. The forest seemed alive, echoing Rick's final days, the tension, the fear, the quiet defiance. She imagined him moving through the undergrowth, soaked and muddy, hiding the diary, keeping a secret he could not share. The juxtaposition of courage and betrayal, love and obligation, weighed heavily on her heart. She opened her eyes, scanning the documents. Names blurred by time, orders altered, messages delayed. The full picture was beginning to take shape. Her emotions churned between sorrow and determination, anger and admiration. We need to reconstruct his last days precisely, she said finally. The witness account, the diary, the orders. We can map them against the terrain. We can see where he went, who he encountered, and perhaps why he vanished in the forest rather than returning. Feldman nodded. It will be painstaking and emotionally exhausting. But you're right. We can create a timeline, reconcile the accounts, and begin to understand what really happened. Elaine picked up the diary again, fingertips brushing the fragile pages. He wanted someone to know the truth, and now, I will be that someone. We'll honor him, and we'll reveal what's been hidden for so long. The storm outside raged, wind rattling the window panes, trees bending under. Its force, the chaos mirrored Elaine's emotional state, turbulent, relentless, yet strangely clarifying. She felt a surge of resolve. The truth could be found, pieced together, and brought into the light. She opened another faded page of the diary. April 15, 1943. I am weary, but I trust in Maggie's courage. If I disappear, let the forest guard. My story, perhaps one day, the world will know not only of my flight, but of the decisions that shadowed it. And may those who follow understand the cost of loyalty, love, and truth. Elaine whispered to herself, voice barely audible over the storm. Rick, I understand now. I understand everything, and I will make sure they do too. Feldman watched her closely. Elaine, you're shouldering more than just his story. You're shouldering the moral weight of every choice, every secret, every betrayal. It's immense, but you're strong enough to bear it. Elaine's eyes hardened with determination. I have to be. For Rick, for Maggie, for the truth. No matter how fractured it is. She gathered the diary, the witness notes, and the archival documents, laying them carefully in a protective case. The storm outside continued its relentless pounding, rain blurring the forest into a grey, shifting haze. Yet within the cabin, clarity began to take shape. Each fragment of information, each witness account, each diary entry contributed to a mosaic of courage, love, betrayal, and human imperfection. Elaine paused by the window, watching the forest sway violently, shadows stretching and twisting in. The wind, the eerie quiet of the long-forgotten crash site and surrounding woods, now felt charged. Expectant, as though the land itself held its breath for the truth to be revealed. Feldman placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Tomorrow, we begin the final mapping. We'll trace his steps, reconstruct the sequence, and see where the last moments align with everything we now know. It's time to bring the fragments together. Elaine nodded, resolute. We will, and we'll finally understand not only what happened to him, but why. The forest has kept secrets long enough. Now it's time they speak. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the forest in stark white brilliance. And for a moment, Elaine imagined Rick moving through the shadows, aware of the dangers, carrying his diary, determined to survive. She pressed her hand to the table, feeling the diary beneath her fingers, a lifeline connecting past and present, courage and truth. The storm's fury began to ebb slightly, leaving behind a tense, expectant silence. In that silence, Elaine felt the weight of responsibility settle firmly on her shoulders, but also a glimmer of hope. The fractured truths were beginning to coalesce, guiding her toward the final pieces of the puzzle. And as the rain softened, the forest seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next revelation, the truth that would finally honor Rick's sacrifice and reveal the consequences of loyalty, love, and betrayal in full. The room was silent, except for the low hum of the overhead lights. It wasn't a courtroom in the formal sense, but the makeshift hearing room in the historical archive had the gravity of one. Elaine stood at the front, Rick's diary in her hands, surrounded by Dr. Feldman, a small group of journalists, and 2 surviving military officers. The storm outside had subsided, leaving behind a grey, oppressive sky that pressed down like the weight of decades of silence. Elaine inhaled, steadying herself. She was no longer just a sister seeking answers, she carried the moral authority of history itself, the voices of the fallen, and the unspoken confessions hidden in faded reports and yellowed maps. Captain Richard Caldwell, she began, voice measured but firm, was a skilled pilot, a loyal comrade, and a man whose life was betrayed by those he trusted. Today, we confront the truth, not for vengeance, but for acknowledgement, for accountability, and for history. The 2 surviving officers, Colonel Hastings and Major Daniels, shifted uncomfortably. Their eyes, pale and wary, darted between the diary and Elaine. Time had eroded their authority, but not their awareness of guilt. Feldman handed Elaine a series of documents, archival files, the witness statement, and cross-referenced mission logs. "Everything we've uncovered is here," he said quietly. "The orders, the discrepancies, the deliberate manipulations, it all points to a single chain of command responsible for redirecting Rick into harm's way." Elaine's fingers traced the redacted pages. These men were complicit in his death, whether by direct order or by silence. Colonel Hastings cleared his throat, voice unsteady. I will not deny that mistakes were made. Decisions were taken in the fog of war." Elaine's gaze was unwavering. Mistakes? Or manipulation? Deliberate actions to remove a skilled pilot, for personal or political gain. You knew he was in danger and chose inaction. That is not a mistake, it is betrayal. Major Daniels shifted in his seat, looking away. It was complicated. The orders came from above. We followed protocol, and protocol was rigid. You followed orders, while a man died because of them, Elaine interrupted sharply. "And you never spoke? You never acted? Do you understand the cost of that silence?" Hastings looked down, hands clasped tightly. "We understood it then, as you do now, and we have lived with it every day. There are no victories in this admission, no exoneration in confession, only regret." Elaine's eyes softened, but only slightly. Regret does not undo the harm, but acknowledgement. Acknowledgement is the closest we can come to justice, 50 years later. History can finally record the truth. Feldman stepped forward, adding, "The manipulations, the delayed communications, and the hidden orders were all orchestrated by individuals within the command chain. They acted out of fear, envy, and ambition, rather than concern for the men under their charge. The evidence is clear." Hastings exhaled, voice breaking. "Yes, I was part of it, though not the instigator. Some of us stood by while others ensured Rick's mission would be fatal. I cannot take it back, I cannot change it. I only can speak now, before time erases the chance entirely." Elaine felt a shiver run down her spine, a mix of sorrow and release. "And you, Daniels?" The older officer's eyes welled with tears. I I did what I thought was duty. I thought obedience was justice. I see now that duty without morality is nothing. Rick trusted us. I failed him. I failed all of you." The room was heavy with silence. Elaine pressed her hand against the diary, feeling the weight of Rick's life and choices. The sacrifices, the love for Maggie, and the courage that had defined his final days. Justice had not come in courtrooms, indictments, or punishments. Justice had arrived in acknowledgement, in recognition, in the confession of those who had lived with the consequences of their actions. She opened the diary and read aloud the final words Rick had written. "If I vanish, let the forest hold my story. Let those who follow understand that courage is costly, loyalty is rare, and love is a quiet defiance in the face of chaos. The truth, if found, may be the only justice I am owed." The words resonated through the room. Tears streaked Elaine's face, but she held herself upright, voice steady. "Rick, I found the truth. I will carry it forward. You are not forgotten. Your bravery, your choices, your love, every part of you survives now because we refuse to let silence hide it any longer." A candle flickered on the table, throwing dancing shadows across the walls. It was symbolic, the fragile, trembling light representing lives lost, truths obscured, and justice long deferred. Elaine placed the diary beside it, letting the moment of acknowledgement stand as a testament. Outside, the wind picked up again, rattling the windows. Yet it no longer felt oppressive. It felt like a chorus of whispers, the forest itself murmuring approval, remembering the pilot who had disappeared, and the sister who had refused to abandon him, even in absence. Hastings spoke quietly, voice heavy with decades of remorse. "I wish things could have been different. That the right decisions were made, that Rick had survived. But at least now, the truth will endure." Elaine nodded. "Yes, it will endure. Not for vengeance, not for punishment, but so that history knows the cost of silence, the price of betrayal, and the measure of courage." Feldman glanced around the room, eyes lingering on the empty seats at the backspaces once occupied by those who had died, by those whose voices were never heard, by friends and comrades whose stories ended abruptly. These seats, these gaps in history, we honor them by telling the truth. That is the closest thing to justice we can offer. Elaine ran her hand along the worn wooden table, feeling the weight of time pressing down, yet buoyed by the clarity. That confession brought the storm outside had calmed further, leaving a grey, steady drizzle. The forest, the cabin, the flickering candlelight, it all felt like a witness to reconciliation. However, delayed. She turned to Hastings and Daniels. "Your acknowledgement is part of the truth. It cannot erase the past, but it ensures the story Rick entrusted to us survives. That is justice. Not legal, not immediate, but justice nonetheless." Both men nodded solemnly, shoulders slumped under decades of remorse. They had survived the war, the years of secrecy, and the moral consequences of their decisions. Now, in this quiet acknowledgement, they bore the cost of truth openly. Even if it had come half a century too late, Elaine returned the diary to its protective case, carefully closing it. She looked out the window at the forest, imagining Rick moving through the undergrowth, facing betrayal, surviving the crash, protecting Maggie's secret, and writing with a trembling hand so that one day someone would understand. "This is for you, Rick," she whispered. "We've finally found the measure of your courage. We've confronted the betrayal, acknowledged the silence, and preserved your story. Justice may be deferred, but it is not denied." The candle flickered one last time before settling into a steady glow, casting long, calm shadows over the faces. In the room, outside, the forest seemed to exhale, leaves trembling in the gentle wind. The ghosts of the past fallen soldiers, silenced officers, betrayed comrades, were at last given their due. Elaine stepped back, feeling the culmination of years of searching, heartbreak, and discovery. She realized that justice had not come in courtrooms or punishments, but in truth spoken aloud, confessions made, and recognition of sacrifice. In the shadows of betrayal, she had uncovered the light of acknowledgement. The room, the candle, the forest, the diary, they all bore witness. And in that acknowledgement, Elaine understood the ultimate truth. Courage, love, and loyalty endured, even decades later, through memory, through testimony, and through the unwavering pursuit of the story that had begun 50 years ago with a pilot who vanished. The forest was quiet that morning. A thin veil of mist curling among the trees, softening the sharp edges of reality. The rusted fuselage of Rick Caldwell's Mustang sat solemnly in a clearing. Partially restored, but left intentionally weathered, a symbol of both survival and decay. Moss clung to the metal like a fragile memory, and dew shimmered across the wings, catching the pale sunlight. Elaine walked along the narrow path leading to the memorial, her footsteps muffled by fallen leaves damp from the night's rain. Each step felt like a pilgrimage, each breath a tribute to a life that had vanished, yet persisted in memory. She paused before the plane, tracing her fingers over the corroded metal. It was strange how something so lifeless could carry such vitality. Man's courage, love, and choices etched into every dent, every flake of rust. For decades, the forest had hidden him. Now, it bore witness. Dr. Feldman approached, carrying a worn notebook of photographs and archival prints. Elaine, he said softly, you've given him more than remembrance. You've given him context, honor, and narrative preserved. Few can do that. Elaine looked at the plane, her eyes lingering on the cockpit where Rick had once clutched. The controls, steering through storms, literal and figurative. It's strange, she murmured. I can see him here, yet I can't forget the fear, the betrayal, the loneliness. It feels alive. Feldman nodded, scanning the clearing. Memory is like this, forests and parts overgrown, others stripped bare. But the act of preserving it, of marking it, is what allows us to heal. The plane isn't just metal, it's a bridge across time. Elaine crouched beside a plaque that detailed Rick's service and the circumstances of the crash. Names of the squadron, dates, mission objectives, all carefully curated to convey both history and human consequence. She ran her hand over the letters, imagining her brother reading them in some distant memory. He never got to see this, she whispered. He never knew that one day someone would understand. That's the cruelest part, and yet the most beautiful. From the edge of the clearing, a group of historians approached quietly, their cameras and notebooks in hand. One of them, a younger woman named Clara, stepped forward, hesitant. Elaine, I wanted to say thank you. Documenting this story, connecting the witness accounts, and preserving the diary, it's remarkable. You've given generations a tangible piece of history. Elaine smiled faintly, eyes glistening. I only did what I had to. He was my brother, and the truth. The truth demanded attention. Another historian, a man with silver hair, added, what strikes me most isn't the plane or the mission, it's the human story. Love, betrayal, courage, it's all here, in the scratches, the rust, the diary. Without your dedication, we might have lost it completely. Elaine's gaze returned to the cockpit. She imagined Rick's hand brushing the controls, the fear in his chest, the resolve in his eyes, and the quiet longing for Maggie. She thought of the witness, the confessions, of the surviving officers, and the painstaking mapping of his final days. The story had been reconstructed, piece by piece. Yet the emotional residue, the scars remained. She exhaled, letting the weight of years wash over her. The plane's wings stretched like arms frozen mid-flight, and in them she sensed a voice, a whisper carried by the mist, remember me, and carry the truth forward. Do you think it's enough? She asked Feldman quietly, almost to herself. To preserve his memory, to acknowledge the betrayals, to finally confront the cost. He looked at her, tone gentle but honest. It's never enough, that's the truth. Healing is ongoing. The scars of war, of loss, of betrayal, they never disappear. But acknowledgement, remembrance, and understanding, those are the closest we can get to peace. Elaine nodded. Her eyes wandered across the forest floor, noticing small signs of life. A squirrel darting across the path, birds calling to one another, sunlight glinting on spiderwebs strung between branches. Life persisted, and so did memory. She pressed a hand to her chest, feeling the rhythm of her own heartbeat, syncing with the pulse of the forest. She thought of Maggie, of the secret correspondence, of love constrained by duty and silence. She imagined the lieutenant, decades older, still carrying the weight of choices made in smoke-filled cockpits and shadowed barracks. Elaine felt a pang of sadness not just for Rick, but for all who had loved and lost, for all whose voices had been silenced. Clara approached again, holding a photograph of Rick and Maggie together, faded but intact. Elaine, this was hidden in the archives, misfiled all these years. Thought you might want to see it here, with the memorial. Elaine took the photo carefully, brushing her fingers over the worn edges. There they were, Rick's determined grin, Maggie's quiet strength, the promise of love that had been cut short by war and secrecy. Tears welled up, and she allowed herself to feel them fully. They were brave, she whispered, and even if history didn't see it at the time, we do now. We honor them. The mist swirled thicker around the memorial, blurring the forest beyond. For a moment, it felt as if time had collapsed, the 1940s and the present coexisting in the same space. Elaine could almost hear the hum of the engine, the rush of wind against the fuselage, the whispered orders, and Rick's quiet muttering as he navigated the forest, protecting his diary. Guarding his secrets, Feldman stepped beside her, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. Elaine, your work ensures that the sacrifices, the love, the betrayals, they all resonate now. You've turned silence into narrative, loss into remembrance, and despair into a legacy. Elaine exhaled slowly, feeling a profound release. It doesn't erase the pain, she admitted. I'll carry that forever. But I think I can finally walk forward without feeling like I'm betraying him by letting go. Maybe the forest, maybe all of this, can help me heal. The rusted Mustang glimmered faintly in the soft sunlight, breaking through the clouds. Its presence, once hidden and forgotten, now commanded the clearing with quiet dignity. Elaine stepped closer, touching the metal once more. You survived in memory, brother. You survived in courage. You survived in truth. The historians quietly began documenting, their cameras clicking, pencils scratching notes, preserving not only the physical site, but the stories, emotions, and echoes that surrounded it. Each photograph, each written word, would carry Rick's legacy forward, ensuring that future generations could witness the consequences of war, the moral complexities of duty, and the enduring power of love. Elaine lingered a moment longer, breathing in the mist, the scent of wet leaves, the subtle chorus of forest life. She realized that while justice had been symbolic, while closure could never fully erase the psychological scars, remembrance offered a kind of solace, a connection to the past, a recognition of sacrifice, and a space to grieve and honor simultaneously. She finally turned away from the plane, feeling the weight of decades lift fractionally, replaced by a quiet resolve. The forest seemed to exhale behind her, the rusted wings gleaming softly, as if nodding in approval. Every shadow, every echo, every memory had a place here now. As Elaine walked back along the misty path, Dr. Feldman beside her, she spoke quietly. This is what it's all been for, remembering, keeping him alive in truth, in love, in history. Feldman smiled softly. And that, Elaine, is more enduring than any verdict or medal. Memory and truth, they carry forward when everything else fades. Elaine looked back once more, seeing the Mustang framed by the forest mist, a monument to courage, betrayal, and the resilience of the human heart. The echoes in the forest were no longer just whispers, they were testament, they were legacy. And for the first time in 50 years, she felt a fragile peace settle within her, a peace that honored Rick, acknowledged the costs of his life, and promised that his story would endure. Twilight draped the forest in a muted glow, shadows stretching, long and thin, across the clearing where Rick Caldwell's Mustang rested. The mist clung stubbornly to the treetops, curling in spirals that seemed to whisper secrets from decades past. Elaine stood near the memorial diary in hand, pages trembling lightly in the cool evening breeze. Every flutter of inked paper carried the weight of unanswered questions, the resonance of courage, and the ache of lost lives. The forest seemed alive with memory. Each rusted rivet in the plane, each dent in the fuselage, each flake of peeling paint felt like a heartbeat of the past, pulsing in rhythm with the whispers of trees. Elaine had walked these woods countless times over the months, retracing Rick's hidden path, imagining his footsteps, and now, as the shadows lengthened, she felt the uncanny sensation of him watching both present and absent. Her fingers traced the diary's final entries, lines blurred, but still legible. She paused at a section she had overlooked before. A string of numbers and letters, seemingly nonsensical. 14D7FA. If found, understand this. There is more than my story, more than the forest knows. Seek beyond the plane, beyond my disappearance. Trust Maggie. The others are shadows. Elaine's breath caught. She whispered, another secret, another story hidden in plain sight. Dr. Feldman, standing a few feet behind her, leaned in, eyes narrowing thoughtfully. A code, perhaps. Military shorthand or a cipher. But why leave it here, after 50 years? Rick was meticulous. He wanted this preserved for someone who could understand, someone who could continue the search. Elaine's mind raced. Could there be another pilot? Another tragedy buried in the fog of war? A companion lost, overlooked, erased by circumstance and silence? She thought of the missing reports, the redacted files, and the faint hints of conspiracy that had already consumed her life for decades. She flipped the page carefully, reading again. The truth is a flight without end. One may land, but another continues. Follow the markers. Do not trust those who wear medals, yet hide names. Courage survives where memory persists. Her chest tightened. The diary wasn't finished. It had left a trail for Haror, anyone who could decipher it, a flight path beyond closure. A testament that Rick's story was part of a larger puzzle, a continuum of hidden histories. The wind picked up, stirring the rusted metal of the Mustang, causing the wings to groan softly, as if in response. The forest held its breath. Elaine looked up at the silhouette of the plane, dark against the twilight sky. In that moment, it was no longer merely a relic of the past. It was a sentinel, a beacon, a guardian of truths yet undiscovered. She sank to a nearby log, diary open on her knees. Images of Rick and Maggie flickered in her mind. Whispered confessions. In damp hangars, secret letters exchanged under dim lights. Courage born of love and necessity. The coded message seemed to promise continuation, a flight unfinished, secrets suspended in time. Elaine felt the weight of responsibility press heavily on her shoulders. To ignore it would be to betray Rick once more. A shadow shifted near the edge of the clearing. Elaine looked up, heart quickening. Feldman stood silently, notebook clutched to his chest, face pale in the fading light. It's not just about this forest, he said softly. Rick may have hidden more than we imagined. There's always another layer, another person, another truth obscured by decades of secrecy. Elaine's gaze returned to the trees, imagining hidden paths, abandoned cabins, concealed wrecks. She thought of the witness who had come forward, of the officers who had confessed, and of the squadron's lost members. Perhaps there had been another pilot. Another life entwined with Rick's final mission, whose story had vanished into obscurity. The diary hinted at it, but the specifics remained shrouded, just beyond reach. She pressed the diary to her chest. Rick, you were never finished. Your story, our story, it's incomplete. The words hung in the cold air, carried off by the wind, scattering like leaves across the forest floor. The shadows deepened, and the first stars began to pierce the dusky sky. Elaine imagined the plane lifting, engines echoing in the quiet of imagination, carrying Rick on one last flight. She could almost hear the hum of wind over wings, the crackle of the radio, faint voices of comrades lost, and Maggie's whispered counsel from memory. The past and present seemed to overlap, intertwined in the mist and shadow. Feldman knelt beside her, tracing the faded letters of the coded message. If this is a cipher, it may point to a location, a person, or a date. But it could also be symbolic, a warning, a lesson, a call to continue seeking truth. Elaine closed her eyes, letting the wind press against her face. Another mission, another story. Perhaps Rick never intended for closure. Perhaps he wanted the search to continue, as a reminder that history is never truly settled, that truth is never complete. She rose slowly, diary in hand, and walked around the clearing, letting her fingers brush over the Mustang's rusted wings. Every dent, every flake of metal, every streak of faded paint seemed to hum with memory. The forest was both graveyard and guardian, keeper of secrets, witness to courage, betrayal, and love. Elaine paused at the edge of the clearing, staring into the darkening woods. Somewhere beyond, perhaps, lay another story, a life intertwined. With Rick's final flight, lost but not forgotten, she felt a chill, both frightening and exhilarating. The narrative she had followed for decades now pointed outward, into the unknown, into the silence of the forest that had kept so many secrets. The diary's pages fluttered in the wind. One of them caught on the plane's cockpit rim, trembling as if alive. Elaine reached out, steadying it, and read the last legible line aloud. The forest remembers all who pass. Seek, remember, and honor them. Courage is not extinguished by absence. It endures in those who continue the flight. Her voice faded into the twilight, carried by the mist through the trees. She felt the lingering weight of grief, the pull of unresolved questions, the ache of decades lost. But alongside it, there was determination, a commitment to continue, to uncover, to remember. The journey was far from complete. The last rays of sunlight painted the rusted Mustang in ghostly gold and crimson, highlighting every scar, every indentation, every mark of survival. Elaine imagined Rick, perched in the cockpit, eyes scanning the horizon, trusting her to follow, to continue the story, to honor those who had fallen unseen. She turned slowly to Feldman. "We can't stop here. This is only the beginning of the next search. If Rick left a code, it means someone else, something else, remains hidden. We owe it to him, and to history, to find out." Feldman nodded, the wind tugging at his coat. "Then we follow the markers, piece together the remaining truths, and ensure that the flight he began is never forgotten." Elaine clutched the diary, one last time, breathing deeply, letting the twilight wrap around her like a shroud and a promise. The forest was still, yet charged with anticipation. Somewhere among the trees, hidden paths waited, secrets lingered, and memories stirred. The story of Rick Caldwell, the betrayal, the courage, the love, and the missing truth soul remained alive. Suspended in the shadowed woods, the Mustang's silhouette grew darker against the deepening sky. Wings outstretched like an eternal sentinel, Elaine stepped back, eyes scanning the horizon, imagining the flight that had never truly ended. The missions, the lives, the hidden voices waiting to be uncovered. The forest whispered, carrying the echoes of courage and the haunting refrain of history unresolved. Elaine exhaled slowly, wind tugging gently at her hair. "We'll find it," she whispered. "Whatever it is, we'll follow the flight, I promise." As darkness fell, the diary's pages fluttered once more in the breeze. The final lines almost invisible, leaving more questions than answers. The rusted Mustang stood silently, a monument to past and present, truth and secrecy, courage and loss. The forest seemed to breathe around it, the whispers of history thick in the air. And somewhere in the distance, a new path waited, another story beckoning. A final flight yet to be completed. The light faded, leaving only silhouettes, shadows, and the lingering echo of a pilot who had vanished into time, his courage, secrets, and the moral ambiguities of history suspended in the forest, haunting, unresolved, and unforgettable.